Right, so we're on the, how many Twitters have we got in here? Yeah, we've got to be careful what we say.
You turned off the wireless, right, Steve?
Yeah, wireless is off. Okay, we've got a little treat. Oh no, it's only the popcorn.
I've got rubber ducks.
Fantastic.
But they're mine.
All right, so we're doing Ask the Experts. So we've been trying to get several of you to Twitter and ask questions at some point in time over the last few days. And obviously we've got mics, because the lovely ladies are at the back with the mics. They're going to dish them out later as people want to get involved and ask questions. We are obviously recording this. Please do not swear. I was going to say that. Okay, so we've got various questions that have been sent in, so we're going to kind of read through the questions. But we're first going to introduce, that kind of funny term at the top. Well, we'll just introduce ourselves, basically. And I'll start with me, because I'm Steve. Hello. Yeah, I had a problem. Sorry, so yeah, that's me. My expertise is probably now conferences, actually. Completely redefined my remit.
Hi, I'm Spencer. My expertise is going to be sleeping shortly. But yeah, generally at the moment it's all around farm configuration, topology, design, those kind of things.
Okay, Neil Hodgkinson, Microsoft. I think, from an expertise perspective, enterprise search, performance, scalability.
Chris Wyatt, Microsoft as well, Neil's team. I keep saying Neil's team, and he hates that because I'm working with him, not for him, right? Data protection, backup recovery, DPM, perf and health, that sort of area is kind of where I'm at the moment. So that's
just
me.
To qualify, these are IT pros, not devs or anything, right? And then at the front, others down the front, everybody in the front go, yay! All right, no. And it wasn't MC, right? So we've got Penny here, we've got Mark McRae, we've got Pete, we've got Alex, and we've got Ian, and we've got Chan. So we've got some of the people that have been speaking here as well, so that when we can't answer 90% of the questions, we've actually got the experts at the front. Now, we've actually got a deck, haven't we, for the Ask the Experts, because we've got all the questions on it. I think we should start with the IW questions, actually.
I don't know what order these are.
They're in no order. I think they just start. I see we do a developer one. Look.
Don't care about those. That's all tap.
Actually, you guys sent quite a few questions in. That's pretty good.
There we go. There's one.
Oh, that's me. Excuse me.
Should you migrate content types in 2007 site collections to the 2010 content type hub? Should you, could you, would you?
Well, you certainly can. Should you? It's very much it's going to be the answer to all the questions, by the way. It depends. It really depends on whether you view that, not all content types are going to be suitable for, global publishing, if you like, in terms of the farm and the web applications and the consuming site collections. So it really depends on the content type. If it's something you want to be made available everywhere and have one point of management, then yes, you probably should migrate that content type to the hub. If it's specific to a given site collection, then no, you shouldn't. So it depends based on the actual, the type of thing that you're doing with the content type, and where you want it to be made available.
I also think that with the managed metadata, right, we've all seen how it's been functioning this week, right? And obviously it redefines the way that you actually originally approached your business process into content types, right? So you actually have to go back and think why you had to do that first content type originally, and now that you've got these new fandangled ways of doing things, we're going to change the approach. So that's probably going to be a good reason not to bring them across. Before we go any further, by the way, we've got to talk about what we're doing. We nearly forgot that. Chris yesterday decided he didn't want to show you anything. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Sorry.
right, you've all been waiting for the demo, right? So, I'm meant to do a session after this, because I just thought you want to go to the dev, or, I don't know, you could go to the dev, ask the experts, but we thought, no, we'll give you another IT pro session. So, what we're going to do, we're going to double date, right, Chris?
Yeah. Fine by me.
So Chris is going to come up first in the next session and get on with his demo that he missed yesterday. So all of those that missed his demo, get in here. He's going to... It is working, right?
Yeah. Health and monitoring for those of you that weren't here.
Yeah, so the health and monitoring demo is going to be in here, 20, 30-minute pure demo, straight off the cuff, get it working first time. You know you want to see it. After that, I'm just going to go on and do my bits about the web apps and starting off from your farm build and how we actually get it working and using the wizard of death. Go on then, what's the next one? Got it on?
Oh, sorry.
Unless anybody wants to answer some more on that.
Yeah, I mean, was there any follow-up on this question, or did the answer... sorry, I can't remember who said that it was theirs. If there's a follow-up, then...
Yeah, does anybody want to add to the content type stuff that they've been hearing, the managed metadata? Has that kind of got a spin-off from this? Have we got the mics?
Yeah, we've got questions.
Over here.
There should be music to go with that.
It's on. Talk into it, just make sure. Say hello.
Hello.
There you go, please. Working.
Hi, just an extension to that. I was going to ask if there's any, I know there's the whole managed metadata now there, but is there any other fundamental changes to content types that may come across if you do try and upgrade them into 2010?
That's a good question.
Yeah, your workflows is something to really be solid in the terms of the testing. You really want to do a kind of like an evaluation of what you've got. So crawl out your site, figure out, document the existing content types, and you can categorize them. Like the simple ones will come across no problem. The more complex ones, maybe using external data or workflows might cause you problems. So do that kind of analysis phase first, for sure. And obviously, the bigger your deployment, the more important doing that is.
I mean, the core content type has not had a lot of work done to it. Obviously, the elements within it have, with your information policies and all the rest of it. But the actual piece of the content type itself, no, not really.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just gone to a high level.
The basic thing is the functionality is the same. We've not done anything to break the upgrade story there. So the only change is the new column type, right? But you wouldn't have that before, so it's not going to damage it.
Metadata. Is there any kind of relationship between SQL, MDS, Master Data Service, and SharePoint Metadata Service? Is there any way to consume master data between SharePoint and SQL? Yeah,
there is a relationship between the two products because
it was supposed to release as part of, I think, SharePoint, part of the Bulldog project. Yeah.
I'm sorry, say that last part again.
I think initially it was supposed to release as part of SharePoint.
Exactly, yeah. Originally, the acquisition that's been rebranded SQL Server Metadata Services was going to be, it was intended to be released as part of SharePoint. It's been moved to SQL because that's actually, for doing master reference data, SQL Server is the most logical place to do that in terms of product positioning. There is a relationship. Yes, you can combine them by using BCS to connect the external data from the SQL Server service into managed metadata. But what's going to happen going forward, I don't know. And if I did, I couldn't say anything about it anyway. So there's a relationship, but that choice of where to, which product to put it in, will stay now.
Anybody else?
Next one. Oh, here you go.
Why should you not activate self-service site creation? Why should you not? What are best practices when you activate self-service site creation? Go back to question 1. Why should you not activate?
And maybe me and Neil can give our internal spin on this.
Sure.
So we have kind of, in Microsoft, we have a lot of separate web apps, or separate farms, in fact, because we have quite big deployments. And HTTP SharePoint is kind of the self-service, create your own site collection area for us to go and do that. So I think it depends on how you architect things. Enabling self-service site creation on the one and only web app you've got is probably a little bit crazy, right? Creating a separate dedicated web app for these sort of things is the right way to go, but obviously you're going to need to do some things with workflow, quotas, management of all these things straight off the bat. I know that there are some custom solutions out there that do that, and I know a lot of people have done that, the sort of self-provisioning engines.
Yeah,
Anything?
like you say about the internal deployment at Microsoft, we have custom workflow-driven site creation. So those self-service site creation is enabled. The whole process and the interface that you have when you're submitting your content, so your site title, what URL do you want, that kind of thing, is a custom page. And behind the scenes, we also do custom distribution. So when the site's created, it doesn't automatically go into specific databases. We've got a whole kind of arrangement behind the scenes in terms of several databases, and we direct the sites to specific databases based on potential for size, load, and also for business impact reasons as well.
So we actually have like 3 categories of business impact. If the data were to get lost or stolen or whatever else, you kind of rate that. And I think as part of the rating process, that drives the workflow in the background as to the SLAs that would be attached to where that sits in a database. So you kind of can build it up on that.
Yeah,
I've seen a good example of that. Sorry, just to add to Chris's one there. I've seen an example of that where companies have used it, adding to Neil's workflow for projects, where they've done project sites through that process. And they just have that's it. There's project A, it's that site collection because the workflow's kicked in and created the site collection. And that's it, that's where it lives, to the database.
I mean, in terms of best practices there, as Neil mentioned, don't try and customize the SC signup.aspx page. That's the page that's used to create the sites. Do another file, your own file, that implements the, whatever it is you're collecting from the end user at creation time. Obviously, you require self-service site creation for my sites. Yeah, because they're built on the fly the first time the user goes to the My Site link. So that's a requirement. There's obviously a requirement as well if you're using tenant administration and you want the tenant admin to be able to create new site collections. That relies on self-service. Also, you remember you have the manage personal sites permission for the service application. So only give that right to the people you want to be able to create sites. And then you can lock it down, if you only want one group of 5 people in the company to be able to use it, everybody else will be able to see the page, but they won't be able to submit it. So,
just to add, sorry, Spence, I think that all comes down to what's the purpose of that particular application, right? I've been to customers where they've got one site collection and tens of thousands of sub-sites. Yeah, we've all been there. Doesn't work, causes problems. Maybe have a dedicated web app, maybe have self-service site creation for those projects and so on and so forth, but in the right scenario, obviously not on your corporate homepage. So you need to balance it between. Answer the question. Any questions?
It answers the first bit, which is why should you not, right? Because there's no simple answer. It's not a question of you shouldn't, you shouldn't. It's application. There's no straight answer to this. Some web apps, you might need it for certain purposes, such as partners or projects or whatever. Other web apps, you definitely don't want it because it's very structured in the way that you're going to approach the growth and natural progression of the sites within it. So,
yeah, and you've got the management side of it as well, right? If you don't have a team of people that are looking after the SharePoint installation, then don't turn this on. You only turn this on if you're going to be keeping an eye on it and making sure you're managing your content databases. Back up, because otherwise you're going to end up with the giant database from hell there. Then you have to do some work to take them out and split them.
So anybody want to answer that?
I suppose top 2, or could we go 3 best practices is quotas on if you're going to turn it on. Yeah.
Possibly use the auto deletion option if they're very dynamic.
Quotas and some of the retention policy. Without those 2, it's going to fail at some point, right?
Yeah.
As well as the quota side of it, also enable or configure the maximum number of sites per database. You don't want to be running 15,000 sites in a database.
3.
3 works.
Delete some items.
Index
I'm just saying.
Is the person here asked this question?
I'll move on.
Okay, moving on. That's interesting, isn't it? Okay, how can you improve the speed on a large 2,000 plus items? Of course, the 2,000 missing.
So,
that's the one
is this correct? Because it says they're less than 2,000 items. Maybe perhaps he means more than 2,000 items. I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, you could delete some items. Being serious, you could reorganize the content storage. Obviously, there's reasons why you want this stuff all in the same list. Yeah, I mean, this whole 2,000 number is a myth, right? That you can have many more than 2,000 items in a list, but think about it from 2 sides. First of all, from the user's side, how many of you here manage your files on your desktop? You got 2,000 files on your desktop? No. Right, well, okay, there's one guy. Oh, it's Nick. It's Nick. Yeah.
have after this week.
Yeah. Yeah, having that many items in a container is a bit
Use
silly.
auto range as well.
Yeah. The only folder you should have that many items in is like the recycle bin or something. Yeah? So from the end user perspective, really consider whether that's the right approach. But the number itself is a recommendation for acceptable performance of the view of the list. You can have today many more than 2,000 items in a list, and as long as you deal with the default view, you'll be okay. Now, I'm not saying you can have millions of items before performance degrades. That's obviously going to do. The bigger it is, the worse the performance is going to get. The new 2,000, if you were here this morning, I mentioned, is now 5,000. So wherever we had 2,000 before in the software boundaries, that's now 5,000. Or sorry, where they had 2,000 in the document before, it's now 5,000. Indexing of the columns would be a good way to improve the performance.
We've got the new query indexing capabilities, right? The
Yeah.
ability to do your new query-based web parts, navigation and your taxonomy-driven structure, so you can present all this data in a completely separate place outside of the list anyway. So to some degree, do we need to look at this from viewing a list? Should we not be looking at it as the list is there out the way? We've got other ways now of aggregating and surfacing that stuff through. So there really is a new twist to that side, right? My children, sorry, I don't do that at all. No, yeah, you mean the throttling the web application?
The
Well,
list
the
is
list,
Throttling
yeah.
the list itself.
Yeah.
The round trips, of course, could be the killer there, right? If we've got too many items, round trips to SQL, permission structures, lots of access control entries on each item. Not necessarily saying it's a good practice to do that, but that can happen, and that can cause a lot of round trips.
And thinking about the SQL side of it as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how well you orchestrate what you're doing at the SharePoint side of things in terms of views and lists and sizes, and I'm not going to say the F word, the folder word. If your SQL server is not maintained, I don't care how big this list is, it's going to struggle. The performance is going to fall through the floor. So maintaining your SQL servers is also key to highly performant SharePoint systems.
And adding to what Neil says on the SQL side, does anyone know, I brought this up in my session the other day, why 5,000 items is the chosen number now? So SQL Server escalates row-level locks to table-level locks at 5,000 by default. So you're not going to really get anything better out of it than 5,000 unless you start making changes at the SQL layer. So the point there is that you can't really improve the speed anymore unless you start doing the indexing of the columns above 5,000 items, or unless you start tweaking SQL and so on. And that's a bit of a grey area, so worth bearing that in mind.
And the drop in performance of that 5,000 is pretty steep. Once you start going beyond it, it is pretty a steep curve that suddenly starts degrading that performance down.
And also, just to clarify the whole view issue, it really frustrates me, the whole myth-buster side of it. Nobody actually views all 5,000 items, even in the all items view, right? But it's like 1 to 30, but that still is retrieving the 5,000 plus items, because if you do a sort, it has to still do the trip to SQL, grab the 5,000 plus items, and then sort them. So even though you're only viewing 30 items on the page, SharePoint still treats that as a 5,000 item plus view. That's kind of where the myth lies. So,
yeah. And that's where the throttling comes in as the option for.
And I'm going to demo that later, so that's cool.
Yeah, and the trick here is, from the admin perspective, is use the dev dashboard to view the performance characteristics of the query on that list, so you can now see that, without doing any real work. You can turn that guy on.
Have you all seen that? Has anybody shown that in the
Yeah,
IT Pro?
yeah,
Did you?
yeah.
Okay.
That was our number one feature for IT Pros, was the developer dashboard.
But they're no specific order. And the other side of it is, don't look at your list at all. Leverage search. Yeah? Find what you need to find in search. The search engine's cool these days, okay?
I think that's the most important thing, actually. That's the takeaway from this one. Search is too powerful now to try and keep using the standard old list mechanisms. You don't need to, at all. Well, at all's a big statement, isn't it?
Less frequent.
Yes, less frequent.
Is Semtex 1638 here?
There we go.
Oh, here we go.
Hey.
Excellent.
That's an explosive question.
Neil.
There is a new one. there is sorry.
Sorry, we need to just ask the question. So does Search Server Express die with 2010?
So the answer is no. There's a new iteration for Search Server.
Cool.
So That's kind of the answer. No, no, it's not dead. And there will be a new version.
That was a good one. That was nice and easy.
Yeah, we like that one.
More of those. Keep them coming.
Because, of course, we've got the BCS in Foundation, right?
Yes.
The hooks underneath.
Some, yeah, well, yeah. You have the infrastructure. You don't have the web parts.
So, theoretically, right, you look at the foundation elements where you've now got the Search Express, which has got some nice cool bits in it, of course, and you've got the BCS hooks. You know, you can do quite a bit with Foundation in terms of getting that initial push into a business that's kind of trying to get SharePoint. You know, you can do a lot, but obviously the next step of the SharePoint piece is the problem, because you can get a company going down one stream, they start putting big lists and libraries in, and it grows, and site collections and sites, and now it gets unmanageable. And now we need to get it to SharePoint Server. So we got the nice bits in Foundation again, but with BCS added as well. So we can do a lot. How would you upgrade my sites?
They're definitely silent.
Upgrade questions.
I want to pick on, so Sergey in our team. Am I right in picking on you here, my friend? He's done some, I'm sorry. So Sergey's another one of the PFEs, and he's done some work with his customer on this. I remember having a discussion over beer. Oh, sorry, I've nominated him to come up now. So Sergey, you did some work, right, on my site migration with your customer. He's probably the best person to do that, to discuss some of this.
Yeah, well, from the work that, as you say, I've done, and I have done some work, I don't really... The best thing I can say is that I don't really understand the question, as in, my site is just another type of site, just another template that a site collection is based on. So there isn't really that much complexity.
I mean, the profile pic, the pictures was a thing that you worked on, was it not?
It had nothing to do with my site, though. That's
My
just
bad.
that's just the new way that that SharePoint now deals with pictures. User pictures and profiles, and if anybody's interested in that, I can talk about it for half an hour.
Sorry, isn't there a concern that when you see, for example, you can't do a simple DB attach upgrade of my sites from 7 to 10 because you lose the connectivity to the end user, and you have to re-establish that association to the end user?
Well, you probably know more about it than I do.
Okay, sorry.
This is why
So you're going to sit back down.
We didn't really do DB attach. We did. How did we do it?
So one of the recommendations, I mean, I have to admit I've never done it, but one of the recommendations I've seen is for this particular scenario, in place upgrade that and migrate. Mm-hmm. So migrate when you already bring it to 2010 and then move it. Don't do an in-place upgrade. Don't do an in-place upgrade anyway, but and keep it as an in-place upgrade. But upgrade it in place and then migrate it from 2010 to 2010.
Yeah, to the fresh one.
Don't do 7 to 10 for my sites for the content, for the actual content DBs that you're going to move. Otherwise, what happens is the user profile connection to the my site doesn't exist. And if you do a DB attach migration, you'll have no my site host. So when you end up with the user tries to go to the my site, two things happen. One, the fact the actual site collection already exists, so you get a problem anyway, and it tries to create that situation. The other side of the thing is the user information, the profile information for the user, so when they have a little drop down that says go to my site, can't populate because there's no information in the user profile that says where the my site is, because it was never created in 2010. If you create it in 2010 or fire an in-place upgrade and then move the whole thing over, then everything works straight, as you'd expect.
If you took the database that's got all the my sites in it after you've done the SSP upgrade and you map the SSP onto the user profile sync service, wouldn't that fix that one?
That should fix the problem. Yep.
Or theoretically, I mean, I suppose there are many ways in which you can address that. You could probably get to the same point if you were to pre-create all the my sites.
Well, there's a number of ways to do it. If you create a new my site host after you've done DB
Create
attach.
a new my site host with a new empty content database.
Yeah. The action of going to the my site host URL actually performs the sync to the end user to their existing my site.
Pre-create all the my sites using obviously the same name logic that you were using in 2007, so that the URLs would actually be the same. And then restore the database, and that should do it, really. Or alternatively, you say that the connection is not there, but it should be fairly easy to re-establish that. PowerShell.
Yep.
both tasks, do everything with PowerShell.
We have the wrong mic to the person who got to PowerShell.
Yeah. Next door, mate. Later. Thanks, Sergey.
Thank you, Sergey. Sorry for picking on you, my friend.
Can I go now?
Yeah.
Cheers, mate.
You still have to convert from the 2007 template to 2010 template, correct?
Yeah, you're going to when you upgrade, you're still going to be using the old My Site look and feel and the features and functionality on the previous site template.
Sorry, just to add to that. So when you upgrade, you basically get the option of. When you upgrade, you get the option of keeping the keeping the previous SharePoint 2007 UI, so you can actually test your functionality of your My Sites and so forth using the previous UI, and then convert that into the new UI.
Yeah.
So you get the option regardless of My Sites or anything.
Okay, I get that, but the UI doesn't include all the new web parts that are on the new My Site template. So it's not actually being rebuilt using the new template.
No.
You've still got the old style My Site. So how do you get the new style My Site as part of your conversion for your users?
That's what Neil was referring to. With
And
his,
Sergey's excellent suggestion is to actually recreate them in 2010.
Yeah.
And then the content, you recreate them, you'll have empty My Sites? Am I
Well, I
missing
think-
something?
If you recreate them, because the template exists, the template is obviously file system based. If you recreate them in 2010 and then do the DB restore, you bring in the content in, and the DB will actually upgrade when you attach it to the 2010 environment. So you'll have the 2010 database schema associated with the 2010 MySite template.
But that restore will replace the ASPX pages on which the web parts are defined. So you're bringing back the old web parts.
The template's on the file system.
Yeah, only if
No, but once you've created the My Site has pages with web parts on it
Oh, okay.
that are in the content database. When you do the restore from the content database, you overwrite those page definitions.
If you don't edit them, it will use the pages from the content.
Yeah.
It's part of the site definition. So if you deployed your custom code or your customization to your My Site through features and solution files, then you need to upgrade that because it's a custom site definition. What we find usually is for My Sites, anyway, that's kind of from my experience, that a lot of people do customizations to the My Site definition just so that they could update their master page, for example. So therefore, there's a custom solution file that gets deployed as part of that. So you need to upgrade that as part of the upgrade process.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of users do add their own web parts to their My Sites as well. Is that covered in that scenario?
No.
Out of the box.
I mean, if it's an out of the box web part, so they've added like an RSS viewer to it, then that will be taken care of. But if it's other things, then they can't be dealt with. The other thing to watch out for is the organization browser. If you're using that in 2007, not sure why, it's not very good. But anyway, that won't come across into the new one, which is a funky Silverlight display effect.
We could turn this whole thing into the 3 to 7 pane, 7 to 10.
We'll walk out with more grey hairs.
We've got the same problems that we had before. Mapping templates, custom code. If we've been out there butchering this stuff, it's going to be a nightmare. It's the same deal. Nothing's changed because the same logic's applying. So if we're going to go and migrate a bunch of site collections that we've basically customised to the hilt, we've got to address those customizations first if we want to try and do a smoother migration of the content and the templates and the code and everything else around it, which is what Chan was saying about updating your custom solution files first to try and get that bit fixed. That's not going to fix everything, though. If somebody's been in with SharePoint Design and doing their thing, you've still got to solve those problems first, or leave those elements alone, leave those site collections alone, and start again.
This is where pre-upgrade check comes in, right?
Yeah, the pre-upgrade check.
Exactly. So before you do any of that stuff, with Service Pack 2 of SharePoint 2007, you've got a tool called STSADM pre-upgrade check. You can run that against your environment and figure out where those customizations are and then how to fix those. So there's quite a lot of work that you probably need to do auditing your SharePoint farm to find out what the best approach is. So in place, if you've done nothing to your farm, yeah, possibly, but you're probably going to use a hybrid of the approach, in place and DB attach.
And my sites from 3 to 7 was equally as painful, right, Penny? I mean, you still have sleepless nights, don't you now? I remember we wrote a bunch of stuff and content on upgrading and stuff from 3 to 7, and we found that the actual my site stuff was just painful to get through and just get it working. So the minute we start customising it, we just got to be careful. We just have to take our approach.
So my answer to that one, sandbox solutions are really cool, but how will we persuade our developers to actually use them by default? Don't deploy their solutions for them. Then they have to, right? I mean, if you're letting your developers deploy the solutions on your production farm, then you're doing something wrong. So it's not about persuading them, it's about just not letting them, right? And it sounds harsh, but it's true. If they're doing anything at the site level or below, I can't think of that many reasons necessarily why they would want to, you know, have full GAC type access and full object model access. It's more of a perception and just adjusting to it side of things, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean, it's certainly going to take time for developers to buy into this idea, because the immediate developer reaction will be, well, that sucks, you know, because I can't do things that I wanted to do, like elevate permissions, which is, you know, it's a bit like when something's wrong on the machine, you know, you try it as an admin and it works. On the dev side, if you can't get something working, you run it in an elevate code block and, you know, it all works lovely. So it will take time for the benefits of this to really click with developers on a large scale. But yeah, I mean, as Chris says, if you run your farm, you don't give your developers farm admin, right? And you don't deploy their custom solutions for them. So they've got no choice but to use Sandbox. And then when they hit the problem that means that they do need a farm solution, because there are many cases where they will hit that. That's actually a good thing. That can play into the whole application lifecycle, because then they have to have a conversation with somebody. Right? They can't just go ahead and code it. They've actually got to have a conversation, and it might not be the right approach to what they're trying to achieve. It might be the easiest from their perspective in code, but you can have more of a conversation with the weirdos next door about what the right approach is. Right? And that's what this is all about. Bringing, you know, the divide between development and IT pro is a real problem space, specifically with SharePoint, and it needs to get better. And this is one of the ways that can sort of force that forward. And we will have, Microsoft will be producing application lifecycle management case studies and best practices over the coming months. And so that will be published towards developers, but it's essential that you guys are familiar with that material. It's not talking about code, it's talking about how you move stuff around between environments and so on. And so that will have some tips around, you know, how you can, you know, ease the developers into doing it. I mean, if it was me, I'd just use brute force. And like you say, Chris, you just say, sorry, farm solutions aren't allowed. And, you know, the only ones we'll authorize have had some form of rigorous quality assurance. And the same applies to all of the vendors that are selling SharePoint solutions as well.
Yeah, and the flip side to that, of course, is if there is a farm-level solution, then the thing to do is to then have governance around that. So you say, okay, now you need to run SP dispose check and we want to see the report. Now we need to see the dev dashboard output when your web part's running on the page. Now we need to see X, Y, and Z. If you've got that and you've got this kind of workflow happening between, you know, sandbox solutions and full trust ones, you should be pretty good to go, in my opinion.
The other thing about sandbox solutions is there's two types, right? There's going to be the ones deployed internally and potentially ones that they're downloading from some fuzzy website, right? And that's going to be another potential issue. If I'm not mistaken, we've got the farm, disable, online office, gallery feature, whatever it's called. I can never remember what that thing is. But as an admin, we can turn off the ability for users to browse the Office online place that's not yet available, where they can, well, obviously there's going to be solutions eventually uploaded and available to download. So we can control it a bit as an admin, so that we're not just letting people download the BBC weather web part randomly and running it on there, which will happen, right?
And I mean, adding to that as well, something that I brought up with some of the MS Online guys about this was that the whole sandbox solution framework is kind of controlled, or the reporting on it is controlled by timer jobs, yeah? So when we start hammering the server, we actually process those statistics in a timer job every 15 minutes, and then I think every couple of hours. And if those timer jobs aren't running, from my testing, you can still use the sandbox solutions. So as an admin, you kind of need to be responsible for making sure those timer jobs are running, because if they're not, you can actually get to the point where the little bar chart that shows your usage goes over the red mark and it doesn't actually get throttled back. So kind of there is an element of looking after your farm there to make sure that feature doesn't take over.
Yeah, they're certainly cool. We like them, but they've got to be managed.
Blimey, they're all IT pro, yeah? Is Planet Wilson here? He's gone home. Just deliberately asking difficult questions.
That's an evil question.
Yeah. What's the best way to deploy a 2010 in a large geographically diverse organisation? Well, again, this isn't it depends. I mean, it depends on the organisation, because any large, no two geographically dispersed, I guess is a better word for this, are the same, have the same characteristics in terms of things like the amount of money they pay to their telecoms provider, their data centre, physical infrastructure. They might have existing agreements with network hardware vendors, so you might be tied into using a particular accelerator and those kind of things. Pretty much the models remain consistent with what we have 2007 for a high level architecture perspective, in terms of we do not recommend a single farm, obviously. We're going to look to a regional deployment, so 3 different farms. We can do more stuff over the WAN than we could in 2007, but it's still not really the right approach here. I talked a little bit about this in one of my sessions earlier in the week. SharePoint Online, and I don't get any sort of brown envelope for saying this, SharePoint Online is probably the best approach to deploy SharePoint for a geographically dispersed company. Because then Microsoft hosting are taking care of all of that stuff that you don't want to take care of. Because you have to become an expert in a lot more things when you go down this route. WAN acceleration, the management of multiple farms, perhaps with different language, the administrators, different teams around the globe, time zone issues, when a timer jobs are running, when backups are running. The whole, the bigger it is, the more pain it is. So, I mean, we could talk through some options potentially here, but there really is, it has to be, you can't use a cookie cutter approach to this. There's not like 3 different common models and you can just tweak them a little bit. There's so many specifics in the mix here that are different for each company. I mean, I've done quite a few of these and no 2 have been the same. The other thing I would say, and this is purely my opinion rather than any kind of best practice or whatever, but I would steer you away from following the Microsoft deployment of SharePoint. Microsoft's deployment is very large and it is very impressive and it's very well done. But Microsoft is not representative of most companies. Right? They're obviously going to be an early adopter. They have many skilled individuals that can manage their environments, and they have a vested interest in, doing it quickly, having it ready early. So the guys have been running 2010 for a long, long time now, in production effectively. And whilst it is a good model in terms of SharePoint scalability, in terms of, using it as a sort of template or a blueprint for your deployment is, in my opinion, a bad start point.
I suppose the other point to that question is if the question was, does SharePoint 2010 bring anything to the table in terms of the geo-replication story? And the answer to that is no. Nothing has changed from 7. So we can't just start, taking lists and sites and replicating them down WAN links to other farms and keeping them in check. We don't have that.
Yeah. I mean, there are some optimizations around, but obviously we used to turn on caching and all the rest of it and so on and so forth. There are some optimizations around CSS files and JPEG image clustering or GIF image clustering, like the ribbon is actually just one massive image and we get the pixels within the image when we render it. So it's only one, return round trip to the server to grab that one image to render the entire ribbon. So there are optimizations for that sort of setup where we're not doing hundreds and hundreds of round trips for multiple JavaScript, CSS, and JPEG images. So that kind of helps, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the page payload being reduced, the number of connections being reduced makes it more doable to have a single central farm. So one option is you have one farm, you pick one of the data centers, preferably the one that's got the most SharePoint skills, have the farm in one central location, and it will perform, from an end user perspective, it will perform acceptably over the WAN, right? It's SharePoint speaking to other SharePoint over the WAN that's the problem here. And we have some improvements in the client as well. If you can deploy Office 2010, we have the upload center, we have some improvements there on the client that make it a better experience for end users. A couple of people have deployed a global deployment, but they're hosting it in effectively one location here in Europe, and that can work very well. So a lot of people go down this route because it's geographically dispersed organization, and because they have an existing Exchange and Active Directory infrastructure which is hosted across the 3 different data centers, they think that's what they need to do for SharePoint. And the reality is that the systems are very different. SharePoint doesn't do replication. You shouldn't try and make it. There are third-party tools that can help in this area, but you should really strongly consider just how important is it to have the content be available in 3 different locations, because that's 3 lots of content you've now got to back up and restore. What happens, the farms can get out of sync very easily. It's just not really an appropriate approach here to do multi-data centers.
Yeah, just add one thing to that as well. Also consider the fact that outside of SharePoint, but on the Windows platform, you've got the concept of branch cache, which is new capability for caching data locally in regional centers. Consider using that. The testing that's been done by the SharePoint and the SQL Cat team, there's no enormous improvements in performance over the WAN, or not over the WAN, but in performance locally for clients that are significant distances away from the SharePoint farm.
Yeah, that's a good solution for the hut in Africa where they're doing drilling for oil or something like that, and they've got a very low bandwidth connection, and maybe on an air card or something like that.
And we've got Office web apps as well, right? I mean, why download it when you don't need to? That's the other side of the story.
Yeah, exactly. The point is here is we're going to go into this whole plethora of the different scenarios that you could be employing here, because we could be using Groove SharePoint Workspaces. There's SharePoint Workspace theory, right, where we've got offloading that to workspaces and then peer-to-peer to their clients, depending on the scenario again. So there's so many different ways of approaching this, as Spence said originally. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. It just cannot be. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
Just wondering if you have, let's say, a content database in Europe, one in the US, and one in Asia, but you want to consume the service applications. So you have one service, maybe one SSP, but you have several content databases.
Yeah, I've got to mention that, didn't we? Publishing services.
Yeah, so you can have an enterprise services farm in one data center, and certain service applications perform better over the WAN than others. If you're talking about things like managed metadata, it's not going to be a problem. I mean, you need a decent link, but it doesn't need to be, super duper. Something like search, you don't want to do that over. You want to use Search Federation for that use case. But it depends on the service application, whether it performs well over. I hate the term WAN because it implies internet, and that's not necessarily the case. It's all about latency at the end of the day. Forget about the distance between the places. It doesn't matter. I mean, the latency between me and my father's computer is terrible because he still uses dial-up, right? It's got nothing to do with the physical distance between the 2 places.
Whereas I found on Sunday, emailing Chan 3 feet away to his New Zealand
it took a week.
To mine was rather fast. But certainly the publishing services, as we showed in the service application session, where we showed that we could publish that managed metadata service as a core metadata model, but then still have divisional metadata services local in their farm, is the kind of the key driving factor here of that service model breakdown. And certainly that is one good example of where you could do that sort of corp approach, farm, and then divisional, local, regional service at the lower level. So yeah, don't ever discount that.
Next.
How long got left?
So I'm thinking,
We also have a couple written down here. Should we do one of those?
Because we don't want to
Is
do
that
the
because we
forms.
don't want to answer that one?
Not really. I don't really understand this one, to be honest.
Well, if you consider that we're saying forms users, so people are using forms-based authentication. In 2010 speak, we're talking about claims-enabled web applications. Claims search with claims works almost the same way as it does with NTLM, or classic Windows authentication. We still store the claims ACLs, so we still are able to identify users and security trim the results based on the claim, or based on the user's identity. So from that perspective, there's no difference. Some things do change slightly in that things like if you're hosting Search Center on a claims-based enabled site, for example, alerting doesn't work. Okay, so there's some caveats around that. And when you say forms, just think the whole claims scenario. So there are some limitations for search, but by and large, in terms of security trimming of content, the end user shouldn't see any difference.
Did you say we had some written down as well?
Oh yeah, we'll do one of the ones we've got written down here. In the managed metadata session, I think that was ours, we're in trouble here, mate. There was some red warning text regarding older client applications when adding a managed metadata column to a list. What is the impact when using older client apps with this and other features? Yeah, so that's kind of, central admin's way of telling you, are you really sure you want to do this? That pops up every so often.
We're talking about office clients here, aren't we, right?
Yeah, office clients. Yeah, I mean, the real impact here is the document information panel. I think this is the gentleman on the side here. It's all about the document information panel. Depending on the type of column, how that's going to be displayed and is user editable, it might not be possible in the DIP without a custom document information panel, which requires one of the guys next door to produce and install and all the rest of it. So the user will then be prompted. They fill in the ones that it does work with, the ones that may not work, or do not work. Sorry, they'll be prompted with a pop-up dialog, which will be the web page to fill in that data. So they can still submit it. It's just an extra step for them, which is kind of a pain. But that's really the only way it can be.
Yeah, no, it's just like going back in time, right? You just
Yeah.
get the old age-old. As we submit, then we fill it. If we don't do the custom dip. Actually, Mark's here somewhere, isn't he, Mark? I thought Mark, yeah. This is Mark's one.
I think we covered it.
Is that the one we
I think we covered it in the last two.
Oh, yeah. I should have read it first, shouldn't I? Anything you want to ask on top? Okay.
Cool. That's good. That one was easy.
Yeah.
Cool.
Don't install it.
Realistic maximum deployment of SharePoint Foundation. Don't we have a limit on the database? Oh no, we don't anymore, do we?
Nothing.
20 users.
It's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, we could have the same question for any, we could remove the sort of restriction there from Foundation, just say of a SharePoint deployment. It very much depends. It depends on the number of users. It depends on the size of the corpus, i.e. the total amount of data or content you have. It depends on how active those users are. You could have a huge SharePoint Foundation deployment that was used just by a couple of people and it would be fine. The same one used by 100,000 might not be so clever. It's not, SharePoint isn't a scaling, it's not like once you get to a point of usage that you require SharePoint Server to scale further. You can keep scaling SharePoint Foundation in terms of adding machines and so on, as long as you do that sensibly. It's all about functionality at the end of the day. So the bigger your corpus, the more likely it is you're going to want to use SharePoint Server Search. And then, of course, the other additional features in Server, like Excel services, Visio, etc., etc. It's really all about the usage scenario rather than you're talking, the size of the databases or the number of users, those kind of things.
I think just to add to that, though, given the nature of the enhancements in SharePoint Foundation, for example, the BCS framework, the external content type frameworks that we have there, they're going to lead to much bigger deployments of SharePoint Foundation than we ever saw before. Not necessarily bigger, but more complex, and more frequently people use that rather than having to go to the server architecture.
And let's now go out from the IT pros and go full circle to the information architecture that we should have done in the first place when we were figuring out what we're going to use it for. And then we go back to what me and Spence were talking about yesterday. It was yesterday, wasn't it? I think so, yeah. Yesterday on the MMS thing where we talked about putability and findability. Because if we haven't figured all that stuff out, and then we start scaling our foundation, or, you know, beyond site collection sites, down, list, content, nobody knows where to put the same thing, they're all multiple copies everywhere, so we're now putting it everywhere and nobody can any longer find anything. So even though we've got those cool features, it's not actually helped us one iota.
Okay, next one. Oh, okay, we have one more written down. We'll do that.
Last one before we...
yeah, because we've only got... So it works out quite well.
Yeah.
Lots of us, I think this gentleman down the front again, same piece of paper. Lots of us anticipate running both 2007 and 2010 it is. So I think it's just I'm joking. Together for a long period. What options, features are there for interoperating them, like search or profiles, those kind of things? So what features are there to help us running both versions concurrently, I guess?
I suppose I'd start off there by saying the longer you do that for, the more pain you're going to have later, right? Because the more they use 2010, yes, in theory, the less they'll use 2007 if they're using both in the same way, but you've still got to get that old data in and where are you at with each. So my personal approach would be try and migrate. If they're completely separate applications, fine, but if they're one application, you're just having, you know, SharePoint Portal A and SharePoint Portal B and people just use whichever one they want, you're asking for trouble straight out of the box there.
Yeah, again, I mean, it depends on the size of the deployment as well. It's also going to dictate how fast you move sites over to the new version. Also, again, I don't want to keep harping on about this, but you need to be aware of the environment. You know, so you need to audit the 2007 environment, make sure you understand what all the site collections are that you've got. You know, get some metrics on how big they are, you know, which ones haven't been used for 2 years. You know, can you archive that content somewhere, etc. Also, look at some tooling from third parties. So MindJet, for example, have a nice tool that will help you with your hierarchy modeling. And that can sort of inform this approach. But yeah, I mean, I'm with Chris. If you're placing a bet on 2010, you want to go with it, and you've already got the existing 2007 stuff. You want to have a project in place that's going to get that done by, you know, like a year down the line or something like that. I would say.
The other approach, of course, is have both, and then let I mean, I've had customers that did this from 2003 to 7 because they just couldn't upgrade. It was just a nightmare. So have both, and then just let the other one die.
Yeah.
It sounds stupid, but a lot of people did that.
Yeah, there's another thing to add to that as well. You can have the concept of something called read-only content databases, where after Service Pack 2 you can actually go to SQL and say this content database is read-only, and the user uses every functionality to actually add content to your 2007. So you could use that as a kind of a gradual migration method as well.
I suppose it depends as well on the time frame that you're trying to have in the back of your mind here, because there's nothing in the life cycle of the migration that says you can't have a 7 farm. You've figured out which site collections you could upgrade. You strip those out, put them in their own 2007 database using the built-in tools for that. Then you can upgrade those content databases in a staging farm and then take those to your 2010 production. Leave the nasty ones over there because we've been toying with those somehow. And then, as Chan said, eventually you can either spark them up on the 2010 and start moving the users to the new environment over time. So you're almost phasing your site collections across to 2010, taking the quick ones you can take that are uncustomized straight to 2010, and then have that. In fact, there's on the upgrade site on TechNet, there's a Visio, isn't there, where they've got the 3 stages of the upgrade options, and that's one of those that they've actually listed on there, is that kind of middle phase, 7, stage, 10, and kind of slowly move your databases between those 3 tiers. So you almost end up with kind of that middle upgradable set of databases that you then move to 10 when they're ready. So you uncustomize, bring them there, upgrade the databases, bring them down to the 2010 production. The ones you can't do, they just die.
And search is your friend as well there. You can use 2010 to index it and just kind of...
Let people find it.
And a lot of customers do that with file shares, right? We set them to read only, they index them, and then... Cool.
I mean, can I just say that one of the key things that's going to slow a lot of... I think one of the key things that's going to slow a lot of deployments down will be, in large organisations, will be legacy browser, particularly IE6.
Yeah,
there's a huge amount of it out there.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Absolutely the case, yeah.
It's fully expected, isn't it, as well, that some companies will have that.
Yeah, I mean, most of the deployments I do for large enterprises, you know, when we finished the project, they've just got done deploying the previous version of the client operating system and Office products, right? You know, because those projects take years to achieve. Yeah, you know, I have no, and I don't think Microsoft either has any misapprehension on the speed of upgrade this time around is going to be, or not upgrade, upgrade/migration is going to be, for the people who have been using it for a long time, will be slower than the last time around. I think that's just a symptom of it being so successful with 2007.
But the reason that drove my question is that I know my division will be very keen to adopt early and will drive their browser adoption. Mm-hmm. But we'll have users that need to collaborate with other divisions over whom I have no control that could be using IE6 for another 2 years.
Yeah.
But I can't switch off what they're already doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you basically, yeah, I mean, like Chris said, you've got to deal with pain there. It's, again, another symptom of the organisational characteristics. Tooling to help there, not really. There isn't really anything I can think of that, you know, other than the standard toolkit of stuff that we would use to manage large environments of any products.
I think if you've got separate departments that you don't have control of that don't have IE8, for example, and they want it, then there's got to be some sort of business feedback to push for that deployment. And I know you're trying to say that, okay, there's another department running on IE6, they're going to want to use SharePoint 2010. The bottom line is, it's not going to happen. So upgrade or don't use it. And I know that's a real harsh line to take, but, you know, what can you do? If that isn't a good enough reason for them to adopt IE8, then there's a bigger issue to address in the organisation, right? If they're still sticking on IE6 because of that, you know, just because they can't be bothered to upgrade, then...
Yeah, it's an agility thing. Yeah, I mean, you know, the reason you want to get rid of IE6 is because it's crap, right? I mean, and there's security holes in it. So for a lot, you know, now I'm not being deliberately flippant. I understand why companies can be slow to move to, you know, respond to this type of thing. But generally speaking, if you want to take advantage of SharePoint and other collaboration technologies from Microsoft, like unified communications and so on and so forth, you need to be, you know, the organisation needs to get away from this 3-year, you know, hugely expensive desktop rollout and be more agile. Maybe look at something like the MedV stuff, the application virtualization for the, you know, in this case, the requirement to use an IE6 to view an old application or something like that. You know, those. It's the flip side of your question. You know, you need to use IE6 because the way the pages have been built only works with IE6 type thing. You know, the application virtualization stuff can help there. So that, you know, the client machine can have IE8 and IE6, and you know, for whatever it is that they need IE6, they use it, and for everything else, they use IE8. So that's one approach to this space. But the bottom line is, large enterprises have to be more agile with the way they roll out their client software. I know that's kind of hoping for a nirvana somewhere down the line in some cases, but that's, you know,
it's a harsh line.
It's
but
the
10
harsh,
years is a long time for a browser, right?
Yeah, exactly. Especially these days, you know, when we're I mean, you know.
So I think we're about out of time, aren't we?
Yeah.
I've got one more question that I almost forgot as well, that I was asked earlier. Sorry, I meant to ask that one. Real quick one. Somebody was just saying if they are going to upgrade and they want to check their service, they want to make sure their servers are ready to be upgraded. Is there a tool in 2010 that can help us kind of check the service pack levels of our servers that are installed, or the patch status, or, you know, how do we do that in 2010 so we can monitor and assess what we've got on our boxes? I think you've got the demo box there, haven't you, Spencer?
Yeah, here we go. Hang on. Press the right button. and press the other one. Oh, no, it's not done it yet.
No, you've really broken it.
No, it's all blown up.
Or not.
There you go. It took a while.
No. Yeah.
You see, technology and me, bad combination. This is our upgrade and migration screen. Now, it's not a great demo because we haven't got any patches for SharePoint yet. But this tells us we can see the features that are enabled, the same thing we had before, but we have a new link here called Check Product and Patch Installation Status. And this shows us all of the components that are in each server in the farm. And so in our IT Pro overview session on Monday, one of the things we mentioned was the ability to run version differences on machines. So this shows you what you've got. I've got a bunch of goop in here, and you can see the build version. And if you have been paying attention, this build version 4763, this machine is the RTM bits. So we haven't been, like spinning your tail. It exists, it's here. You'll be able to get it in the next week or so if you're a software assurance customer from MSDN. And then it will come out to the public soon after that. So just to prove that this thing is actually not just all smoke and mirrors. And
click on those pages real quick down that left side. Go on, just show each page, just to show. Go on.
So we can go.
'Cause you want to see it, don't you?
Yeah. Now you see, I haven't done this before. I haven't used RTM before now. So if it blows up, you'll all laugh at us for being.
And this is press.
Yeah.
Profile working first time.
So the farm configuration wizard was running when we were talking. His service is on server. Here's the servers in the farm, so you can see the build version for the configuration database. That's the RTM config DB build. And here's it's no different from all the other ones we've shown you, but this is the team site that's been created running on the release version of SharePoint 2010. So it's been a long journey, but we're here, and the fun really starts at this stage, both from our point of view, but also from your point of view in terms of being able to, evaluate it, get it in your labs, start playing with it, and without fear of things changing from.
And this is a world's first, I believe.
Indeed.
That you're seeing here. In a public audience, nobody's ever seen this page. Well, apart from the boring picture.
And well,
I don't know about you. I'm really fed up with seeing that already.
Well, you will notice there hasn't been any, mishaps with the picture of the individuals in the office. There's been no photoshopping happened here.
So it is there. It is available, and you're all going to be able to get that soon.
And we deliberately showed it to you guys before the people next door. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, that's right. You can go and brag a little bit to the widows, but don't spoil their fun. Don't tell them what they're going to see. Just tell them that we found a way to block Sandbox Solutions completely and just ruin their day. Okay, I think that's about it. We're about out of time, aren't we? Because Chris, we're going to get on with your demos as well. We're going to set your laptop up. Hope you've all enjoyed the IT Pro sessions from the Ask the Experts. Of course, we've got these last sessions that are going to go on. This is the last IT Pro sessions of the conference after this, so hang around if you want to join in for that. Have a quick coffee break and come back. And welcome to 2010 RTM.